Hello everyone and good evening. My name's Don Arleth and welcome to our main edition of World News Tonight here on TVP World. Tonight, our main focus is on President Zelenskyy and his plan to end the war with a win. A potentially master plan has been kept secret from allies. We'll look at the pluses and minuses, shedding more light on a new Ukrainian strategy. That's coming up ahead, but first up, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Poland shows off the first F-35 for the Polish armed forces, dubbed Hussarz. Polish students who were detained in Nigeria have finally been released. And 84 disabled Polish athletes will compete in the Paralympic Games, which kicked off today in Paris. President Zelenskyy has a 4-point plan to end the war in Ukraine, parts of which we are already seeing unfold right before our very eyes. The recent incursion into Kursk is just part of the first step. While we can only speculate about the latter three, one thing is certain, and that is that the Ukrainian president will soon announce his victory plan to both President Biden and the two presidential candidates.
The true goal of the Kursk incursion, which at first raised the eyebrows of many observers, has now been officially revealed.
The operation in the Kursk region is a part of the plan about which I will be talking with President Biden. The main point of this plan is to force Russia to end the war. It will be fair to present this plan to the US president. The success of this plan depends on him, whether we will get what is in this plan or not.
The meeting is expected to take place next month during the United Nations General Assembly in New York.
I can imagine that in Washington there is a lot of unease about what's going on in Kursk. There's a lot of unease, and I think that Zelenskyy wants to come and say there is a reason for that, there is a purpose, and that I have some kind of a plan, and don't you worry about that.
The Ukrainian president also plans to present the victory plan not only to President Biden, but also to US President candidates Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
That is exactly the way you need to play your diplomacy with Donald Trump. Flattery will get you a very long way.
The announcement comes as part of Zelenskyy's broader diplomatic efforts to secure international support and ensure the territorial integrity of Ukraine. The plan, which has been in development for several months, builds on the conclusions of the recent peace summit held in Switzerland.
Why was this first summit so important? Because we saw the number of countries, more than 100 countries, that are ready, that support President Zelenskyy's peace formulas, that believe that this is the basis for this joint plan.
The details of the plan and its perception by Ukraine's allies, however, remain to be seen.
And joining us now, live from Kyiv with the latest from Ukraine, is our correspondent Oz Chatterjee. Good evening, Oz. What can you tell us about today's developments there on the ground?
Well, why the eyes of the world stay routinely focused on the Kursk offensive as it enters its fourth week. Things are hotting up still in Russia with Ukraine's campaign to degrade Russia's oil facilities, with drone attacks again reported in the Rostov region and also as far away as the Kirov region, which is about 1,500 kilometers away from the front line. So, Ukraine is really not letting up in its campaign to target oil production in Russia, which it sees as vital to fueling Russia's war machine here in Ukraine. Now, there has been more Russian attack on Ukraine too. Kryvyi, which saw such devastating attacks this week, has been attacked again in a missile attack, which has wounded 9 people. And 14 others have been injured in a glide bomb attack in Kupiansk. So Russia's war against Ukrainian civilians is still being waged heavily this week in particular. So much so that a special NATO summit was called by Kyiv, hosted by Stoltenberg, which today reaffirmed the NATO allies' commitments to strengthening Ukraine's defenses, particularly in the field of air defense, where they've been struggling so massively this week. And Russia's having such devastating impact on the civilians here with its glide, missile and drone attacks on the civilian infrastructure.
Yeah, it seems like every time Ukraine gets the upper hand, Russia takes revenge on civilians. Oz Chatterjee reporting live from Kiev. Thank you very much. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz have agreed on what they call an ambitious trade and defense treaty to reset UK-EU relations. Analysts say that the tightening of bonds will help Europe weather any changes in U.S. policy on defense and support for Ukraine after November's presidential election.
Keir Starmer was welcomed to Berlin with military honours by the German Chancellor. They agreed on a major deal covering issues from defence to trade that will be part of a reboot of British relations with the European Union. Starmer hailed it as a once-in-a-generation opportunity.
This treaty is part of a wider reset, grounded in a new spirit of cooperation, with our shared understanding that this will be developed at pace and that we hope to have agreed it by the end of the year.
We want to take this outstretched hand. The United Kingdom has always been an indispensable part of the solution to the major issues affecting all of Europe.
Analysts said the increased cooperation comes as the continent faces the prospect of America rowing back its support for European defence and Ukraine.
In the case that Trump indeed wins the elections in November, I mean, this would be quite an important meeting, because then for Europe, there will be entirely new questions arising in terms of the defense of Europe, in terms of the policy towards Russia, and especially in terms of the support for Ukraine.
At the moment, we have British Storm Shadow missiles used inside Russia by Ukraine. This differed substantially from German approach. Hopefully, Mr. Starmer will sell some of his approach.
After his meeting with Scholz, Starmer left for France, where he'll continue to push for greater ties with the European Union.
Poland's Air Force is celebrating its holiday today, and there's a lot to celebrate. Last year, Poland received its first Korean light fighter jets. Today, the country's deputy defense minister is visiting Fort Worth, Texas, where the first Polish F-35 has been unveiled.
Poland's new F-35 fighter jet. The first unit that will be sent to Poland once its construction is complete.
F-35 is one of the best, no, it's the best jet aircraft in the world. And this is why we need it.
This video shows the construction process of Poland's first F-35 jet presented in Texas today. Another 31 are in the making. The last one is expected to be delivered by 2030.
Poland is right next door to Russia's brutality in Ukraine, and the deep wounds of World War II are not distant memories for Polish citizens. Poland must be able to defend itself, and with this highly advanced equipment, it can.
Today, F-16s are the core of the Polish Air Force. F-35s will change that.
This is a fifth-generation fighter jet, and what characterizes this generation is stealth capability, stealth technology, which means low radar cross-section.
This means the fighter can fly undetected there, where other jets cannot. Before the first arrival of F-16s in Poland in 2006, Soviet equipment dominated in the Polish Air Force. It still has a few Su-22s and around a dozen MiG-29 fighter jets.
Some spare parts are made by the Polish industry, however, the major ones were never produced in Poland, and we needed to import them, for example, from Russia in the past. Right now, obviously, importing these parts from Russia is impossible for obvious reasons. So this aircraft needs to be replaced as soon as possible.
Poland has given 10 of its MiG-29s to Ukraine last year. Warsaw has not ruled out providing the remaining ones to Kyiv once new deliveries arrive.
The group of Polish students detained in Nigeria in early August has finally been released. The 6 university students and their lecturer were kept at a hotel for more than 3 weeks after appearing near violent riots in Kano. They've now been cleared of all charges after diplomatic efforts from Polish officials.
Dzień dobry panu. Pewnie już pan wie, ale...
You probably know this already, but I wanted to confirm this personally. The young people are already free. They're back at the campus in Kano. They have their passports, so this long and unfortunate adventure finally has a happy ending. I'm very happy and I want to thank you for all the help and cooperation with the Foreign Ministry.
Ministerstwem Spraw Zagranicznych to nam bardzo pomogło.
Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski spoke with a representative of the students' families early Wednesday. They knew little about their loved ones for more than 3 weeks.
We will only be calm when we learn about our children's lives and health.
The 6 students and their lecturer from the African Studies Department of the University of Warsaw were arrested during the massive protest in the town of Kano, in the country's north. Anti-government demonstrations erupted in Nigeria in early August due to rising poverty and hunger. According to the spokesperson of the Polish Foreign Ministry, the young Poles ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Nigerian government and Nigerian security service thought that they are members of this demonstration and maybe there would be kind of inspiration of this demonstration.
The Polish students had initially been accused of waving Russian flags at the protests, just like many other demonstrators. This claim was quickly disproven, but it highlights a bigger problem: Russian influence in the region. Moscow has sought to sow chaos in neighboring Niger for years. The presence of Russian flags angered the Nigerian authorities.
Foreign flags have been flown within the sovereignty of Nigeria, and that is totally unacceptable.
According to the Polish Foreign Ministry, the students should be back in Poland in a matter of days. The safe release was the success of both the Polish diplomacy and the University of Warsaw. From the Polish capital, Kazimierz Łysiak, TVP World.
A UN committee has concluded that Poland's highly restrictive abortion law is inflicting serious harm on women, given rise in grave and systematic violations to their human rights. The report, published on Monday, has since gained major traction. A meeting with experts from the Center for Reproductive Rights and the Foundation for Women and Family Planning took place today in Warsaw. Our reporter Katarzyna Nowicka was there and has this next report.
Izabela, Dorota, and Agnieszka. So far, Poland's strict abortion law has claimed 3 lives. Gender-based violence, possible torture, cruel and degrading treatment. This is how a latest UN report has described Poland's current shape of abortion law. We spoke to experts from the Center for Reproductive Rights on what realistically can be done to loosen them.
The Polish government and Polish lawmakers have an obligation to ensure that comprehensive legal reform to legalize and decriminalize abortion is adopted.
A 23-page document by a UN investigative committee outlines grave injustices in Polish legislation when it comes to abortion access, preventable deaths, widespread suffering, and gender-based violence.
The report is clear that comprehensive legal reform to legalize and decriminalize abortion is necessary in order for Poland to comply with its international human rights obligations.
At the moment, abortion in Poland is only legal when the pregnancy is the result of a criminal act or when the woman's life or health are in danger. This makes Poland the country with one of the most restrictive abortion laws in Europe. But it wasn't always like this. Before a 2020 Constitutional Tribunal ruling issued under the Law and Justice Administration, legislation also allowed for abortion on the grounds of fetal disability or life-threatening disease, which made up 90% of all procedures. What followed was a wave of protests against the changes, with the demonstrators using a red lightning bolt as their symbol.
We're talking about degrading, inhumane treatment. These are the words that are used in this report. So we're this country that has this thing written about us.
The ruling coalition, which replaced the right-wing Law and Justice, promised to loosen abortion laws, but has so far failed to do so. Prime Minister Donald Tusk admitted just last week that not much can be done about this.
There is no majority in the Polish parliament in favor of such a right to legal abortion as we have discussed here and agreed with you, among others. There is simply no majority.
The committee's full report includes 22 recommendations on improving women's reproductive health in Poland, but under the current parliament, we can't really expect much change. For TVP World, I'm Katarzyna Nowicka.
The Polish government has adopted its draft of the budget for 2025. Prime Minister Donald Tusk announced an increase in military spending, along with an increased budget deficit of 67 billion euro.
The government says it's confident that economic growth in 2025 will be higher than expected. The Ministry of Finance has raised its GDP growth forecast for next year from 3.7 to 3.9%.
After a year of flat economic growth in 2023, courtesy of the previous administration, this year we're expecting the Polish economy to grow at a pace of 3.1%. In 2025, we expect to see increased acceleration up to a growth rate of 3.9%.
The budget reflects a strong commitment to maintaining current levels of social spending, including popular programs such as the 800-plus child benefit and additional pension benefits. The budget also earmarks significant funds for defense, with military spending set to hit 4.7% of GDP, up from 4.1% in 2024. It translates into over 42 billion euro. Although we see that economic growth is expected to improve, the fiscal challenges appear to be deepening, particularly with a widening deficit and increasing debt, which in 2025 will reach almost 60% of GDP.
First of all, this is still the period of election campaign. We are approaching presidential elections, so this is politically not a good moment to cut any sort of spending. But in the following years, some fiscal adjustments, more significant fiscal adjustment will have to be made. So it looks like the government is kind of kicking the can down the road.
Another reason the deficit will go up is inclusion of debt accrued by extra budgetal vehicles, like the special pandemic fund. Only time will tell how the European Commission will react to the swollen budget deficit in Poland, taking into account that the country has found itself, along with 6 others, under the EU's excessive deficit procedure.
With just 68 days remaining before Americans go to the ballot box to choose the 47th president of the United States, 200 prominent Republican figures are sounding the alarm and breaking rank. Former officials from the Reagan and both George Bush Sr. and Jr. administrations are just some of those calling for Republicans to elect Democratic nominee Kamala Harris. Here are the details.
The race continues as both presidential candidates enter the last 2 months of campaigning before their names find themselves on the ballots. Last week, Republican candidate Donald Trump received a rather surprising endorsement from a former Democrat and independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., making the race for the White House that much closer.
His support was not significant, and it really dropped off in the last several weeks. So right now, I would not suspect that he would be a threat.
Now, however, the tables seem to have turned on Donald Trump, as a truly staggering number of former Republican staffers came out with a shocking statement.
We reunite today, joined by new George H.W. Bush alumni, to reinforce our 2020 statements and, for the first time, jointly declare that we're voting for Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz this November. Of course, we have plenty of honest ideological disagreements with Vice President Harris and Governor Walz. That's to be expected. The alternative, however, is simply untenable.
Members of the Republican Party that have previously worked for former President George H.W. Bush, former President George W. Bush, Senator John McCain, and Senator Mitt Romney are all of the opinion that another Trump presidency would be disastrous to American democracy. But just how significant is this endorsement? Tanya Domi of the University of Columbia has the answers.
But right now, I don't see any major Republicans that would draw like significant public following or be a major persuader or surrogate for the Democrats. No one of that stature's really stepped forward.
As of the latest polls, Kamala Harris is nearly 3.5% of support ahead of her Republican rival. Over the next few weeks, we could see that lead grow even larger as more Republicans rethink whose name they'll leave a checkmark next to. With each passing day, thanks to events like the creation of this Republican letter, predicting the outcome of the November elections gets even harder. One thing is certain, however. Whoever sits in the White House will, for the most part, come down to undecided voters in the swing states.
84 Polish athletes will compete for medals at the Paralympic Games, which start today in Paris. The opening ceremony is taking place at this very moment at the center of the French capital. But let's take a closer look at the Polish athletes themselves.
They suffer from mobility impairments, amputations, blindness, cerebral palsy, and they fight against all odds daily. The Polish Paralympians have committed themselves to fierce sports rivalry, and now they're all set for the most important competition.
In fact, every one of our representatives, the 84 people who are competing at the Games, each of these people has a very interesting story and so motivating and inspiring for all of us.
But unlike some would expect, the level of the competition is remarkably high, says Michał Pol, the attaché of the Paralympics team.
It is a true spectacle to watch. At times, Paralympians perform better than Olympians. I remember, for example, in Rio de Janeiro, in the 500-meter run, the first two Paralympic athletes achieved a better result than the one which got a medal at the Olympic Games.
The Paralympics have been gaining steam in recent years, garnering more attention from the public. More than 2 million tickets have already been sold for the events.
The first tickets to be completely sold out were the ones for the fencing competition at the Grand Palais, and it's impossible for there not to be any fans or no interest, because fencing is almost a religion there.
The multi-sport event comprises almost 550 competitions. Polish Paralympians are expected to snatch more than 20 medals, as there are some strong medal hopefuls among them.
The name which sticks in most Poles' minds is Natalia Partyka, and she is a table tennis player who was born without a right hand, and she's just been a phenomenon in the sport. So she began winning gold medals back in 2008 and picked up golds in subsequent Olympics.
We'll find out soon enough whether these predictions will come true. The Paris Games mark the 17th edition of the Paralympics, an event that is traditionally held 2 weeks after the Olympic Games and hosted by the same city. The competitions will draw to a close on September the 8th.
And now we return to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's 4-point plan for victory. Will it work? Can it work? What is it? And what can we expect from this new strategy? Now here joining me to discuss is Ukraine Program Coordinator at the Global Governance Institute, Vitaly Ryshko. Hello, and thank you for joining me on World News Tonight.
Good evening. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, now I'd like to go through these 4 points first to discuss. President Zelensky just recently announced them. He said one of the areas where part of the work has been done is, of course, in the Kursk region. We were obviously watching that unfold and seeing, potentially maybe subsequent areas where Ukrainian forces are penetrating in Russian territory. But the second is Ukraine's strategic peace plan in the world security infrastructure. Ukraine's strategic place in the world security infrastructure. So what do you think exactly that President Zelensky means by that?
Well, honestly, I believe that it is connected with the fact that the Russia's war against Ukraine is itself the transformative event in its nature, and whether Ukraine will prevail in this war will depend the stability and the predictability of the whole international order as we know it, and whether the rule of law, international law, will prevail over the rule of force.
Well, the third is a powerful package to force Russia to end the war through diplomatic means. So what in particular do you think he has in mind when we're talking about that? I mean, diplomacy has been tried many times in this war. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked, and I don't see any indications that it can. Maybe that Mr. Zelenskyy has a different idea. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that for Ukraine it is really crucial to demonstrate that it is open for negotiations, but also at the same time it has to pursue this path of punishing Russia through diplomatic isolation, sanctions, and other means available. And we know that there are like many different areas where the international community could do much better, especially in terms of sanctions enforcement. And not allowing Russia to find the loopholes in the sanctions mechanism, so to be able to finance its war effort. And also, I believe that it's really crucial to demonstrate to the entire Putin's regime that, look, nobody is really willing to talk with him, and his country is actually paying the price because of him, of being isolated, and because it is sort of a pariah of the international community, which is really, it really could be very devastating for Russia, for its economy, and for its capability to continue this war.
Right, and the fourth, of course, is economic, which President Zelenskyy said he didn't want to talk about at the moment. But if we look at what we're seeing, basically, are these long-range strikes on oil facilities, on gas infrastructure, on critical infrastructure, some power plants. So I would imagine that that's probably what he means. Plus, this transit deal is largely, well, it's not going to happen, right? So they're going to shut off the gas transiting to Europe. But I want to move on to the Republican U.S. presidential candidate, Donald Trump. He has implied that Ukraine's operation in Russia's Kursk region could risk starting World War III. Now, President Zelenskyy said he is going to tell both candidates, and he's going to tell President Biden. Do you think that this is a good idea, that he's going to communicate this strategy? Because so far it's been top secret.
Well, I think it is a right approach that President Zelenskyy engages all the sides. He's engaging the current president, he's engaging both candidates. And it's the right thing to do because obviously Ukraine has to sort of hedge its own bet, right, on the Western support. Look, when I hear these phrases about the World War III coming from Trump, I only think that the U.S. hesitance and the Western broader hesitance in supporting Ukraine, that's exactly what can lead to the World War III.
By the same measure, there's a democratic approach, right? And if he informs, as well as Kamala Harris, I mean, she currently is in the administration, so she would hear about this anyway. But, you know, I want to ask about Jake Sullivan, because he's one of the current members of the administration who, let's say, to put it lightly, is not very well liked in Ukraine. So what would we expect from Kamala Harris administration concerning this plan and support thereof? Because I'm sure one of the most critical things is to get these red lines in Washington lifted so that Ukraine can use its long-range weapons to strike military targets in Russia.
Well, I believe that on Ukraine's part, it is really critical that Kamala Harris doesn't repeat the same mistakes that, let's say, Biden administration did, is that Russia can freely walk through this escalation ladder without being punished or being punished too late. And that she actually lifts this restriction for the long-range strikes. And by that, I not only mean that it should entail the provision of longer range ATACMS, ballistic missiles, that will be used against airfields and logistical objects, troops formations, but also I would hope for reinforcements for F-16s, basically air-to-surface missiles, which will also enable the deployment of the F-16s in their full capacity, right? Because it could be deployed not only just to provide the air shield over Ukraine, but also to target those very important and critical objects within Russia, which we know it is a big country, and you can only imagine the number of these very strategic objects.
Vitaly Ryshko, Ukraine Program Coordinator at Global Governance Institute. Thank you very much for joining us on World News Tonight.
Thank you.
And that's all the time we have on the program. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Good night.